What's up, fifth grade? It's Miss Hang. I hope you are all doing well still and that you're not going too crazy from being inside for this many days in a row. But what we're going to talk about today in terms of math is we're going to go over your number story from Wednesday, which was the 18th. We're going to go from start to finish as to what like an exemplar should look like and how, if you did give your best effort, how it should look in terms of answers for each part in the end. So let's go ahead and I'll share my screen with you. Awesome. So the problem you had on Wednesday, I'll read it out loud. Hopefully you guys are following along as you're watching this if you haven't solved it yet on your own. It says two sisters, Divya and Danya, are playing a game where they try to throw a ball at a target. And so we have this visual model here that tells us how far Divya threw and how far Danya threw. The question is asking us if the center of the target is exactly 20 feet from where they were throwing, who got closer to the target and how much closer did they get? So the first part in what they're asking you to do here is to type the calculations or the math that you did. But we know that in order to fully understand a problem and in order to fully gauge like what the situation is, we want to annotate what we know and want to know is what, and this is what Ms. Hank has annotated here. What we know, again, there are facts from the problem. So facts from the problem is that Divya's throw is 15 and 23 hundredths feet, and Danya's throw is 24 and 86 hundredths feet. And that the center of the target is exactly 20 feet away from them. So if Divya and Danya were standing right here, the target is 20 feet away from them. We don't know exactly where that is, but we know there's 20 feet between this and wherever the target is. What we want to know is whose ball was closer to the target and how much closer did that person get to the target. There's kind of two parts here to this question. This is one of those questions where there is technically a part A and a B, but if you're not reading closely enough, you're not going to catch that there's actually two embedded questions within it. So that's why Ms. Hang wrote it out separately like this, whose ball is closer, because that's the first part of the question I have to make sure I have in my answer, and how much closer did that person get. I think it's helpful if you write it out as two separate questions, even though in this sentence format, it's just one, and they have just one question mark in the end. It's one of those ways, again, like the test makers try to trick you, like they'll just embed questions together, but there's actually two things you need to solve. So the way I went and solved this is I took 20, which again, if you remember, is the distance from where they are to the center of the target, and I subtracted 15 and 23 hundredths, which was Divya's throw. And that gave me a difference of 4 and 77 hundredths. For Danya, it was kind of switched because she surpassed the target. And I know she surpassed the target because 24 and 86 hundredths is greater than 20. So I want to subtract that difference, and I found that it was 4 and 86 hundredths feet away from the target. So if we were to look at these two and kind of compare the two numbers, right, the number that is smaller is technically the person that has the ball closer to the target, right? And whose ball is closer to the target based off of that. Remember the feet that they have from the target is smaller. Who has it? Divya, exactly. Divya is closer to the target, and the difference between her ball and the target is only 4 and 77 hundredths feet away. 4 and 77 hundredths is smaller than 4 and 86 hundredths, therefore her ball is closer, even though it might look on the surface that her ball is actually further away. It's important to do the math behind this, right? You should also notice here that in order to solve these, it is a decimal subtraction problem. And the skill we need to remember there is that we need to line up the decimals. We need to line up the decimals, exactly, right? I'm hearing your answers all the way over here. I know you're saying it out loud because you know these skills. But we notice here that the number 20 doesn't have a decimal. So how would we go ahead and solve that? Take a moment to think about it in your head. Right. We need to add the decimal back in. We need to do what? Add the decimal in. And where does it go? Say it with me. At the end. There's always an invisible decimal at the end of every whole number. So I would just include that decimal right here to make sure that I am lining them up accordingly when I am adding or subtracting. Remember, this is only the rule when we add or subtract decimals. Right, so then that gave us again to our final answer of Divya being closer. If we're moving along in terms of how we should write our number sentence, there's nothing here that you can really combine to kind of, make a smaller condensed equation because or number sentence because there's two separate people that you're dealing with and they really don't have anything to do with each other except for comparing the numbers at the end. So I know normally a lot of you have been practicing before using grouping symbols to kind of put those together. I know Brila was a super expert at doing this. But because again, there are two separate people that essentially need two separate numbers that we have to compare in the end, it's going to be two separate equations. There's nothing you can really do about it. So the first one is going to be where we're subtracting Divya's throw from the current target, and then we're subtracting the throw from the target itself because she had surpassed it. So these are the two that you should in theory have for yourself here. And I didn't mention on top, but this is what you should essentially have mentioned as well in the work, right? Something along these lines where you're saying Divya is closer and how much closer she is. Okay. When we're thinking about why our answer makes sense, the idea here is we want to go back into our writing in number stories, right? Where we're thinking about what it is that we need to do, how we do it, and why we need to do it, right? Because essentially all of this makes sense in our head, right? They're questions that we are answering whether or not we realize it or not. So the first thing, if you remember, read it out loud. Yep, I'll read it to you. What did you need to figure out? Okay, this is a big piece because if we remember up to here in our annotations, there were two questions that essentially needed to be solved, even though there was not a clear part A and part B. The second thing is what steps you take to solve. This is where we're talking about the subtraction we did in the previous box. And then why did we take those steps, right? What is this going to tell me in the end? What answer or clear messages am I going to get from the math I did above? So an exemplar or an example of what you could have written in your own work is, I needed to figure out which person had the closer ball to the target and how much closer they were to the target, right? Again, that lines back up with our annotations here. It's nothing new that Ms. Hang is thinking about, nothing new I have to pull out from my schema. It comes straight from the story. Now we're going into the steps that we saw. So I subtracted 15 and 23 hundredths, Divya's throw, from 20 because she didn't pass the target and got a difference of 4 and 77 hundredths feet. Then I subtracted 20 from 24 and 86 hundredths, which was Danya's throw, because she surpassed the target, meaning she went past where the middle is, and I got a difference of 4 and 86 hundredths feet. This tells me that Divya's ball is closer because 4 and 77 hundredths is less than 4 and 86 hundredths, right? We are putting in words and proving why our math works and how we know this is the correct answer. While you're not necessarily going to be asked to do this a lot on your end of the state test, it's important to have that level of self-reflection and not just assume that our answers are already correct. I know when Ms. Hang did this problem the first time around, I got it wrong because I assumed what the question was asking me, and I didn't actually catch that second question of asking how far did that person throw. But if you're doing the math behind it, right, if I'm finding out these values, it's more likely not going to be important to what we're doing, and it was. So I had to go back and I saw where my mistake was, and I was able to fix it from there, right? So I hope in your work that you're continuing to put this level of thought behind it and this level of, exemplarness, if that's not really a word, but I'm making it up, exemplarness behind this, even though we're doing distance learning, because it matters, right? This type of math doesn't disappear. It just continues to grow and grow as you go into 6th grade and beyond. And you have to know these skills and be able to practice that self-reflection to prove to yourself that you are correct. Right? You shouldn't just assume that your answer is always correct. The first time you do it, you want to double check it as you go, which again, We've already been doing this so well in class. The only difference now is to just practice it online, and be able to articulate ourselves clearly online when that's a much harder task to do. So I hope this was helpful to you and that you're going to carry this kind of feedback, um, and organization for your work into your next number stories for the week. Um, I want to just say now, your number stories moving forward are not going to look like this. I mentioned this in a previous video that we're going to try, or Miss Hank's going to try and make sure it looks more like our style of number stories, just to keep some consistency, even though we're learning from home. Um, that way you don't have any areas of like erasing questions by mistake. I know some of you had done that, or erasing certain parts of it. I'm hoping to just eliminate all of that for you to make it a little bit easier to answer your questions, and then also just leave things as they are so you don't have to worry about missing parts of it. Okay. Again, hopefully this was helpful to you. If you have any ideas for what you want to see in terms of a video, or things to go over, we will definitely do that. Ms. Hank has some ideas in the works, but obviously this is still our classroom. This is still your way of sharing what you want to learn and what you want to do. So feel free, in the comments, to appropriately make a suggestion as to what you want to see. Obviously, it has to be academic related. If there's certain things you want to go over, certain things you want to do, let me know. I am open to ideas. This is going to be our way of life for the next couple of weeks. So want to make sure you're engaged and that you feel like you're getting something out of this as well. So leave me some comments and I will talk to you all very soon.